if the plan that you're putting in place doesn't work in store, it's not going to be the right plan. And what appealed to me about Logile was a chance to bring together the platform and the expertise, not my expertise, the deep retail expertise we have at Logile to come and solve a very real problem in the market.
Welcome to Storefront Science, the show where we decode the chaos of modern store operations.
We're bypassing the buzzwords to have honest conversations with the practitioners and executives who are actually shaping the industry. All right, welcome in everybody to the Storefront Science Podcast. I'm Ryan Whitfield with my co-host Ben Hinshaw. Today we are joined by James Freshwater, who is the Vice President of UK EMEA for Logile. James has spent his career driving growth in SaaS and retail operations, and right now he's leading our charge in the UK as we expand our footprint there. James, thanks for joining us today.
James, before we get into the strategy, let's start with why you joined Logile. This was about 4 months ago. You've got a heavy background in SaaS and growth and go-to-market strategy, and you've seen a lot of different companies and tech stacks. What specifically drove you to say, yes, this is where I want to be, Logile, let's go?
It's a really good question. I was super excited to come and join Logile. What attracted me really was it's a combination of what is a very real retail problem and a platform that's genuinely credible in the market. So, I've spent a lot of my career, helping businesses grow. And the opportunities that matter most are usually the ones solving operational problems, with clear economic consequence, particularly in retail. One of the biggest that I've come across is the disconnect between what a store is trying to sell and what it's staffed itself to deliver. So that was compelling to me as I looked at Logile. And what gave me confidence here was that Logile wasn't just talking about the challenge, like the platform's already being used by major retailers globally. That was super exciting to me. And that matters a lot. So it means there's proven capability. We can talk about that. We've got experience that we can bring to bear around the practical operational input that we can bring and talk about in market and not just with our customers, but with our prospects as well. So, I guess for me, this wasn't about taking a theory to market. It's about taking something that's already delivering value, if that makes sense. And, what I tend to look at as I look at the problem we're trying to solve, really the overarching statement that I'd made would be, if the plan that you're putting in place doesn't work in store, it's not going to be the right plan. And what appealed to me about Logile was a chance to bring together the platform and the expertise, not my expertise, the deep retail expertise we have at Logile to come and solve a very real problem in the market.
No, I love it. It makes sense.
Yeah, and I would say you talked about some of the existing problems with the store execution part of this. And in earlier episodes, we met with Matt Lovett from FXP, and we met with Ross Connolly, our chief sales officer. And then Tom Herman from Northgate had joined us at the Big Idea session at RF. And one of the themes that kept materializing was this idea of siloed operations, too many different tools and platforms, and the issues around that. So specifically, for you and your work since being here in the UK, how have you seen that problem materialize for different retailers?
Yeah, separate planning, siloed planning. So I guess the big danger is that separate planning creates separate truths. Organizations are structured differently and rightly so at a corporate level, but that does have an impact at the store. So the way that I think about that is that if demand sits in one place, labor's in another place, production's in another place again, where it ends up is on the store manager's lap trying to reconcile all these contradictions that there could be contradictory plans. And that's where the strain starts on the store from an operational perspective. One operational plan that has all the right inputs, is really the way to look forward at this. If the forecast is wrong, the labor plan is wrong, So, if labor is fixed, but demand shifts, service suffers and waste rises. So things are moving. And if there's not one central view and one central truth, that becomes a real problem at the store level. So production needs to be tied tightly to actual demand and capacity. We don't want to overproduce or lose margin or under-deliver. So the consequences don't stay neatly in one function; they show up in the operation. I guess that sort of the soundbite is that the store, with multiple spreadsheets, multiple plans all feeding into the store actually becomes the integration layer, and that's a very expensive place to do an integration.
That makes sense. I know as we're getting ready for the retail technology show in London and your
Yeah.
conversations with a lot of UK retailers, I think you've identified one area for hyper growth and kind of the fresh bakery. It's very different than how we do things in the US. Things are often par baked and freezer to oven.
Yeah.
It's simple, but the outcomes are incredibly inconsistent from what we've heard. So is this a lot tied to that capacity, is not tied to demand piece? And then is there other areas for hyper growth for Logile besides this area, or is this like kind of where you're honing in on?
Yeah, it's interesting because bakery resonates here because it exposes very quickly whether the operation's truly joined up, right? So from outside, like, I get it, then it can look simple, a lot of par bake, freezer to oven. People assume that should be straightforward, but actually it's pretty dynamic. You're balancing time of day demand, labor availability, production windows, expectations from the customer on freshness. And then obviously the risk of waste. You're balancing all of that at once. So I guess the underlying issue is that capacity is often not tied tightly enough to demand. So labor may be there, but not shaped correctly. Production may happen, not at the right time or in the right quantity. So, or the team could produce to habit, to what they're used to doing. They're getting instructions from different systems. I know best, rather than to a demand per se. And that's where inconsistency creeps in. So I think we schedule people, but too often we don't schedule production with the same discipline. And that's really the problem that we can solve at Logile with our production planning and labor planning and bringing product and people together in one operational plan. And that's why bakery is such a strong example. It turns the planning discussions for different departments into, quite a real problem in the store.
That makes total sense. It can look super easy on the outside, but actually inside, making it all work properly together is incredibly complicated to a level that people just don't understand. So
It
that makes
is,
sense.
yeah. And absolutely 100%.
Well, the idea of moving away from point solutions to a unified approach was obviously a big talking point at NRF. As was AI and how to leverage it and infuse it into your forecasting and labor planning here in the States. Next month, we'll be over at the Retail Technology Show in London. Do you expect those same themes to be top of mind for UK retailers, or is there something else that you think will be some big talking points at the show this year?
I think it will be a relevant talking point in terms of the UK market shifting away from point solutions. I think appetite is shifting, but in a more disciplined way than people sometimes suggest. So I expect there'll be a lot of conversation about it. And retailers, if you think about it, retailers through the years have been layering on application after application and app after app. One tool for labor, one for task, one for fresh, one for analytics. And they all make sense, right? But in practice, someone's still got to stitch all that together and sort of put an operational plan together. So lots of point solutions end up being a problem in the store, and at worst case in the store and potentially at the retailer level. What I think, as I've come back into the market and sort of settled into talking to a lot of retailers over here now, what I'm seeing is that they're starting to ask harder questions. They're less impressed by isolated functionality, more focused on whether the tech stack is actually going to help them run stores in a better joined up way. That doesn't mean point solutions bad at all. I think that there's a place for certain point solutions. It means the tolerance for fragmentation is lower, especially when it's labor, forecasting, fresh production and execution. That all needs to come together. So they're not short of software, they're short of operational alignment would be the way that I think about it. So I like to answer the point. I do think the market's moving away from point solutions. I do think we'll be talking about it at Retail Tech. But platforms and the realism a platform can bring, I think, is the answer to move forwards. And it's becoming another thing that I'm noticing. The conversation is becoming less about features, guys, and more about what's going to actually help the store perform. And it's at the store level that, I really focus the time on trying to make things as simple as possible so they can execute.
On operational alignment, are you seeing any trends in terms of where retailers are turning to right now to solve that problem?
In terms of getting operationally aligned, I mean, that's where the work starts for me, and it's trying to bring them together. And it's less about logic sometimes and more about incentives, right? So most retailers don't struggle because they lack smart people. They struggle because different functions are measured against different priorities. So merchants are focused on availability, range, and sales. Ops is generally focused on productivity of labor, compliance and execution, finance, costs and returns, of course. So each of those perspectives it requires alignment. But the store doesn't experience the business in silos. You've got these different siloed ways of thinking potentially. So I find the way through that is to shift the discussion from functional ownership to shared outcomes. And I think that'll be a big part of what we're talking about at Retail Tech as well. What are we going to try and improve together? Availability, waste, service, productivity, margin. There's others that I'm not mentioning. Once those outcomes are clearly defined and jointly owned, it becomes easier then to align around an operational plan instead of separate sort of functional agendas, if you like.
That makes total sense. I think bringing people out of the boardroom and having them focus on the outcomes in the store and what their people are experiencing in the store, what their customers are experiencing in the store is the perfect way of kind of bridging that gap and getting ops directors to talk to merchants, to talk to IT, to everyone at the same table and understanding these are the problems we're solving and this is how we get these things done. So there's less divide, that there's less ambiguity, there's less understanding. And that store is this point, the focal point. It's very smart, great way to tackle these problems. The last question we like to ask
I'm getting some serious feedback. I'm getting some serious feedback. You hearing me okay?
We're hearing you okay.
Yeah, I'm getting some feedback. I don't know what it is. Let's keep going.
All right. James, we like to end every episode with 2 closing questions. You can pick one or answer both.
Oh, God.
You can answer these questions as broad as you want or as pointed as you want. And just to give you a little idea of what answers might be like, my dad worked at Domino's Pizza for 33 years. And if you ask him what he kept him up at night, it wasn't corporate strategy. It wasn't new technology. It was the price of cheap. So feel free to be as big as you want or as granular as you want. The 2 questions are, when you look at the UK retail market right now, what is the one risk factor that keeps you up at night and makes you, like, what is on your top of mind for you? And then option 2 is, if you were handed a magic wand to fix any one dynamic in the industry, what is your first thought of what you would want to do with that?
All right. 2 good questions. I have to answer one or
You can answer one or both, up to you.
Okay, I'll have a go. Look, why don't we start with the second one, the magic wand. So if I had a magic wand, I think I've talked about it a lot. I'd create or have the ability to create one shared operational plan from head office to store. I think that would be that would be phenomenal. Not one more dashboard, not one more reporting layer, not one more disconnected workflow, one plan that connects demand, production, labor, and execution. We shared accountability across functions. So I guess I'm summarizing everything we talked about. Once you've got that, a lot of the downstream friction starts to reduce, guys. So decisions get faster, trade-offs get clear, something that they can realistically execute on. So that would be my magic wand. To remind me on the first question, Ben, sorry, mate.
The first question, of course, yeah. When you look at the retail market right now in the UK, what is one risk factor that keeps you up at night? What's top of mind happening right now?
Yeah, it's a good one.
You know?
I think if I think about the progress that retail is making, I think the risk is that it's masquerading as progress. And what I mean by that is retailers are asking stores to absorb more and more systems, more pressure, more decisions, more change without really simplifying the operating model underneath it. So there's just a lot coming down the hill. So stores are incredibly resilient. When you go visit the stores, you'll see, and when you're next over in the UK, we'll go do some store walks, guys. But that resilience can hide some fragility, I think. So teams compensate, managers find workarounds. We've already talked about that. And everyone convinces themselves that everything's fine, but the cracks do show over time. So the complexity masquerading as progress is something that I think about a lot. And when that's the case, if that shows up in the customer experience, like you haven't got available staff or the service drops, it can show up in the colleague experience, and then it shows up in the economics, because like waste increases, productivity slips, and margin gets quick squeezed. So if that it makes sense to me that the risk is complexity masquerading as progress. So I guess that's what keeps me up at night, is how do we simplify, and how do we make things easier at the store level and at the head office level, and kind of bring everything together. And if the plan doesn't work in store, it's not the right plan. And that's the way we should look at it.
No,
Yeah, that was a thing we saw at NRF too. Conversations about how up until really the last year, it's been about invest in terms of technology, and getting away from the idea of like proper implementation and strategy is if that's not carrying its weight, then all the technology in the world won't solve those problems.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Well, great. James, thanks so much for joining us today. Looking forward
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, anytime. And looking forward to the Retail Tech Show next month in London, where you can join us. We'll put the details in the description, so people can come and book meetings with us ahead of time and join us on the show floor. For all of our listeners, watchers, and all in between, make sure to like, follow, subscribe, and find us on LinkedIn. James, thanks so much for coming on today.
See you later, guys.